Well, that worked. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shamina. I'm the Director of Impact Data Science at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. And we are all, on behalf of Mastercard and the Center, so excited that you've made your way out here. The end of UNGA Week, the end of Climate Week. It's a very big time, I think, in a lot of our lives and calendars. So I thank you for making the time to be here with us today. I have just a couple of announcements, and then I'll pass it off for welcome remarks to Shamina. So first announcement is that there are very few breaks, and by few I mean one. We just have such an incredible schedule today, and it's Friday, so we want to keep the momentum going, but there will be a quick break around 2:45 between the panels and then subsequent fireside chats. So that'll be a quick coffee break, but we want to encourage everyone in the meantime to just take a moment if you need to. There's coffee and tea, snacks, beverages out there. They'll be stocked the whole time. There are unlimited cookies. So just take some time if you need to. The restrooms are down the hall back here to the right. The men's is on right here. The women's is around the corner, I found out. Second announcement is social media. I think that there's a few announcements, handles that will be on the screens. We're not technically live streaming this event as a public event. So we wanted to make a note of that, be mindful of that. So we do, of course, want everyone to talk about this event and about what you're learning here, the people you meet. But we just ask that if you are planning to quote anyone, if you could just chat with them first. So a little bit of, Chatham House rules and great conversation to be had here and online. And that is the last of my announcements, I think. So with that, I want to welcome Shamina Singh, the president of the Center for Inclusive Growth.
Thanks, Shanna. Welcome to the Mastercard Tech Hub, where the cool kids come to work. So usually if you, there he is, and there's the mayor of the Tech Hub right there, Ed McLaughlin. So the only way I ever get in because I have gray hair is because we have to throw events like this that bring really smart people to the Tech Hub. So as Shanna said, let me echo her thanks for you all making your way here. I know it's been, for many of us, a hectic, fast-paced week, but what a thrill to all of us be together. Have you guys enjoyed getting back together again? And what a way to end the week by, of course, bringing the data experts together. Now, I can't think of a more exciting thing, can you? And all of So I know for all of you, many of you whom are introverts, do your best to talk to each other, relax, enjoy each other. We got a lot of sugar, a lot of coffee, a lot of things to help break down the silos. But as Shanna also said, this is a jam-packed, really fast day. So things are going to be impacted in a minute. Conversations in 15 minutes. So really this is designed to make sure that we provide tastes of all of the things that you all are working on, because honestly, you are incredible partners. There's so many talented people in this room, and as individuals, you're doing just incredible things. And I think as a collective, though, we really have an incredible opportunity to advance change around the world. So really thrilled and excited to be hosting this day. I'd like to give a special thanks to Mike Froman, who's going to join us for part of the day, and then he'll be back. He's our vice chairman at Mastercard, and we thanked Ed McLaughlin for hosting us. He's our head of technology at Mastercard, and we have a lot of really great people from the organization here. So I hope that you will meet each other, meet them, enjoy the day. So with that, we're going to start off with our keynote, our first keynote speaker. We're really delighted that Tami Dokken has come to join us today. She's the first Chief Data Privacy Officer at the World Bank, and you all know the World Bank. But she is in charge of developing a first-of-its-kind privacy platform and the rules and the regs that the World Bank actually has to follow, which is a pretty monumental task. But she comes out of an experience at MoneyGram, where she was the head of global data privacy. And she's also a licensed attorney with a broad set of licenses and remits and things like that. And so you'll hear more about her, but without further ado, Tami, thank you so much for joining. The panel is yours.
Thank you, Shamina. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Wow, that just set the stage. I feel like I'm with fellow data geeks, and if y'all are introverts, I'm even more comfortable. So thank you so much for the invitation and for hosting this summit. It's clearly a huge success already. I'm going to be quick because I know we've got a lot to get to, but I'm with the World Bank. The bank adopted its first privacy policy in 2018. They lured me in, and I'm building, as Shamina said, the first of its kind privacy program for an international organization. So data is obviously monumental and fundamental to the bank's work of reducing poverty and promoting sustainability. For example, when we are looking at trying to address education, for example, we know that education is a powerful driver of development and one of the strongest ways that we can reduce poverty and improve health, gender equity, peace, and stability. So we know that prior to the pandemic, about 50% of children in low and middle income countries were in education poverty, meaning that they couldn't read standard text by the age of 10. Now, post-pandemic, that number has risen to 70%. So probably not surprising, but the numbers are really, really important so that we can look at what's causing that. How did it happen? What can we do to address that? So underneath the statistics, though, is the personal data of those children and their households. How many children are in a household? What are their ages? What's the information and background of their caregivers? What is their food and financial insecurity situation? All of this fundamental personal data builds those statistics that allow the bank and others to use that to inform our developmental objectives. So data is critical, but we also have to be mindful of how we use the data. I'll quote from the World Bank 2021 World Development Report, which was titled Data for Better Lives. I highly recommend it if you've not looked at this report yet. And I'll quote, "The potential benefits of data depend on data being disseminated and exchanged between parties, but these parties must trust the systems and institutions in order to willingly engage in with them." So how do we develop that trust? My position, of course, in my role as Chief Privacy Officer, is we need to make sure that we're using the personal data underpinning the statistics in a responsible, demonstrable way that meets expectations. So I'm going to focus WDR 21 again. We reference it often. The report's focus on systemic obstacles to equitable growth specifically calls for a new contract around data. This means that we need to inform our efforts and our messaging and meet our stakeholders where they see privacy and security. Not what we see, but what do our stakeholders see? So one group of our stakeholders are our country partners. We are organized with 189 country partners that are part of the World Bank. What do those stakeholders expect? A vast majority of those have data privacy in their constitutions and or in their regulation. So we know that they're paying attention to how we are using personal data. Another, probably more significant set of stakeholders are the individuals that we are trying to help. We know these individuals value the responsible use of personal data as well. Case study. The consultative group to assist the poor, known as CGAP, ran a study in 2019 and again in 2020, so pre-pandemic and then during the pandemic. These studies were conducted in India and Kenya, and CGAP offered various types of loans to individuals. And these were in very impoverished communities, very, very stressed communities. The study offered individuals various types of loans. Some had high interest rates, short wait times, or low interest rates, but long wait times. The study overwhelmingly, both times, pre-pandemic, during pandemic, showed that these individuals in these communities valued their privacy and opted for the high interest rate, or the high wait time in order for the promise to safeguard their data. So to reference WDR 21 once more, we know that our stakeholders are concerned about their personal data, highly interested in privacy, and willing to gravitate toward organizations who hold the same ethos. So the bank, just like everybody else here, I think believes in the ability to demonstrate the responsible use of personal data, and that will facilitate trust, capacity, and coordination across the global sector, as well as help drive data for global development. With that, welcome to the summit. I can't wait for the discussions coming up. Thank you very much.
For those comments. Was that the shortest keynote you've ever heard? Or, I mean, so again, we're pushing through quickly. Again, we started out as a mini data summit, then all of a sudden we turned this into a data summit. So you're giving us good reason to maybe expand it more for next year. So I have the pleasure of hosting the next session. My friend of over 20 years is a woman named Srinivasan, and she just happened to be the 5th employee at Yahoo. Way back in the day. And so I asked her to come and have a conversation with us today about lessons that we can learn from Web 2.0 as we think about Web 3.0. Because what Srinija did, in my mind, and she'll talk more about this, is she was actually she's the founding editor-in-chief of Yahoo. And what that meant was she basically was the first one with her team to organize information on the internet, if you can imagine that. So with that, Srinija, please come on up. So Srinija, there's lots of things, lots of directions we could take, but let me just start. Can I sit here? Is this a good? Okay. Thanks again for coming. Okay, so we've got 15 minutes. We're going to go through, this is going to be your speed session on Web 2.0 and the lessons for 3.0. So, it's 1995. Internet
It's the
Explorer,
1900s, y'all.
Internet Explorer didn't exist. Mozilla becomes the first browser. This is the seminal beginning of the internet. People aren't online, and when we do go online, we're using things like Alta Vista to find things. No company websites, no banner ads. You meet Jerry Yang on a school trip in Japan. What happens?
So Jerry Yang and the other co-founder, David Philo, and I we found ourselves transplanted on the other side of the globe together in Japan for 6 months. We were studying abroad. They were PhD candidates in electrical engineering. I was a junior in college. So it was a classic liberal arts experience and transformational as one would hope and expect, but in ways that never, ever could have predicted. The web didn't exist yet. Mosaic, the browser, hadn't even been invented yet. That would happen very, very soon after. So we just got to be great friends in the way that you get to be great friends when you're transplanted and displaced in a foreign place. And then, fast forward, we come back to, we call the farm at Stanford University. I round out my senior year. They're continuing on supposedly with their PhDs in electrical engineering, but they get a little distracted because their PhD advisor is on sabbatical, and while he was away, they caught on to this addiction of this new growing fascination called the World Wide Web, and they just began listing the stuff that they wanted to be able to refer to and come back to. And Jerry had a list. David had a list. They're sharing a trailer, a supposedly temporary trailer on campus that became permanent digs. And they combined their lists, and then they needed categories, and they needed categories of categories. And a year of doing this, they were overwhelmed by the 24/7 job of just listing websites, organizing them, categorizing them manually as a hobby. And by 1995, it was very clear that they had to take this off of the university servers. It was overwhelming, the network. They was like, Fisher, cut bait. Are you doing this? So they, these two dudes eating bean burritos at Taco Bell rejected $1 million, 7-figure offers from the likes of AOL and CompuServe to go it alone and start their own company and say, what can we make of this? That's how Yahoo was born, and they had a vision for an initial development team of 5 people, the 2 of them, a technical guru that could pick up where they left off on all the coding, a business head coming out of, a buddy of Jerry's from undergrad coming out of Harvard Business School, wrote the first business plan, was our first director of marketing. And the 5th role was what they were inviting me to fill, because they knew that I was working at this large-scale artificial intelligence project at the time, building a huge heterogeneous database of common sense knowledge. And they saw a lot of parallels between that database and this fledgling heterogeneous database of websites, and said, help us figure out what this is going to be when it grows up. How do we manage it?
So what did it mean to be editor-in-chief? I understand you made up your first title.
I took my first title, self-titled, as Ontological Yahoo, because there was the technical Yahoo, other technical Yahoo. There was the director of marketing, and I was like, that's not my speed. So I was Ontological Yahoo, coming out of my AI philosophical background at Stanford, which ended up being quite consequential because it was really about an orientation to what does it mean to even have a database architecture in the first place, that we are forming a world, we are making choices that say who we are, what we stand for, what we attend to, what we ignore. This is a worldview, ontology. And then by the time we needed to publish corporate earnings reports and annual reports and things like that, we needed a title that could be sort of maybe more broadly legible, and so it became editor-in-chief.
And what did that mean?
And when we started, we were just this directory of websites. It was this painstakingly manual, subjective enterprise. I'm saying subjective. It wasn't obvious that it was subjective, but that's one of the huge learnings, is the apparently objective enterprise of just filing sites, listing other people's stuff. We didn't write stuff, we were pointing to other people's stuff, is profoundly subjective. The mere act of aggregation is creation, it's curation, and all of our choice making and sensibilities are revealed in the minutia of all those choices. Jerry and David understood that. They understood that there was a voice to the whole. And so it started off just being about the directory of websites, but we very, very quickly changed and expanded into linking to some news headlines. And then we had an entire news enterprise, and then quickly became, sports and entertainment and finance and shopping. Now you got commerce involved, and every one of the sort of vertical business divisions. So editor-in-chief equally expanded to be a horizontal purview across all the vertical business units, where we concentrated this question of choice making. What is the subjective enterprise, where we may not be putting out bylines and telling you this is us doing it, but it's us doing it. That's what editor-in-chief was. So the first privacy policy, privacy and data protection came under the hood because these are subjective choices about where we're setting guardrails that are consequential. So it became, might think a miscellaneous bin, but really this sort of horizontal central thing that had to do with subjectivity.
Well, you talked about values, standards, and practices. I remember you told me a story about a religious organization that was your first complaint.
I mean, this was 95. We still had fax machines. I don't know if any of you remember those. And literally the fax machine was ringing off the hook, where the incoming faxes were so endless that we couldn't even send a fax out. This was overnight. Because one of our surfers, that was my team, in professionalized web surfing, had mistakenly listed a site under the Judaism category, and the site was about Messianic Judaism. And this was just, that job was, Life 101. It was intro everything. You learn by doing about all the things. And I didn't know that a central departure from Judaism to Christianity is whether one believes Jesus Christ is the Messiah. So what do you do with a problematic crossover called Messianic Judaism, AKA Jews for Jesus? This was the kind, but I was getting stomach aches, because how does one arbiter these profound human conflicts that are really rooted in differences of ontology, of worldview, of choice making?
Okay, so you basically organized the internet. What are some lessons for Web 3.0, tech for good, data for good, all the things that we're talking about today? What are some lessons based on some of these learnings that we should be thinking about?
There are a few things that have really distilled and surfaced for me when I watch. I now feel like the gray-haired lady with rolled up newspaper on her lawn saying, "You're doing it wrong." there are a few things that I think are, we still have time, and we really, I think, have an opportunity to think about deeply. One is just how consequential framing is. So before you even say, like, how do I do what I'm doing, what do you think you're doing? What do you think your job is? What do you think your company's remit is? How are you framing who you are and what you are? It's actually radical that the first page of our first business plan at Yahoo said we're a media company. Because in today's world, big tech, you can't get a media exec to acknowledge that they're a media company. We have tech execs going in front of Congress denying that they're a media company, and actually proudly saying no human editor was involved in these search results. That was the Google News beta. And I mean, Google Search beta, Google News beta. That's a dangerous orientation and misunderstanding or deception. So the fact that Yahoo framed itself as a media company had all these consequences, like a role called editor-in-chief, which meant I still don't see a peer in the industry. I never knew a peer at the time, and I don't see one now, where you actually have somebody whose remit is to think about the impact of these choices and how do our values get manifest in the product, in the pixels. What are our values, and are they manifest? And where there's a gap, how do we close that gap? That was the job. So framing, just think about how important framing is. The second thing I'd say is, when we talk about data for good, tech for good, I'm humbled by how hard it is to do anything neutrally, really, to sort of be a human being and take a first breath. We're in an entangled universe. The ham bone's connected to the leg bone, and it's hard to do no harm. It's hard to do no evil. It's actually hard. So to do good demands a level of depth and introspection and reflection about the causes and effects of our actions. So I would just offer 3 questions to keep top of mind all the time. We're pretty good on to what end? To what end? Why are we doing the thing we're doing? To what end? We're okay on at what cost, but let's think about that deeply. At what cost are we getting these ends? We're really bad on the third, which is at whose expense. To what end, at what cost, and at whose expense? And if whenever we're embarking on something, pitching something, or getting up and doing it again, ask and answer those 3 questions. Ask a lot of different people to think about it and weigh in on it so that we're thinking about the downstream actions. 3 questions. And when you talk about data architecture, you talk about use of data, 3 questions. And then the final thing I'd say is just really tactical, practical, invisible power in framing again. One of our CFOs, a woman named Sue Decker, she sort of deceptively simply asked me one day, my nickname was Ninj, she's like, Ninj, do me a favor, this is complicated, this is a policy question. Just come back, show me a 1-pager that summarizes the issue. Give me some options with pros and cons. Summary, options with pros and cons, and maybe a recommendation if you're asked. Whether you're asked or not, if you go through the rigor, and it's just a lot of work, to try to frame any question before you or your boss as summary, options with pros and cons, and recommendation, it forces you to say, who are all the stakeholders? Will they believe that I have faithfully represented this in a 1-page summary? They might not have written it this way, but they wouldn't offer a dissent. And the options, so much power in deciding, is it 1 choice, 5 choices, 9 choices? 3 is a good number. 3 works pretty well, but whatever it needs to be, of where are there meaningful differences in the paths ahead. And then if you're gonna be really thinking about the real pros and cons of each, again, you have to think about every stakeholder, how would they see it, and are you faithfully reflecting their views? The recommendation almost falls out, and then what you're dealing with is the right debate about hierarchy of values. And it forces clear-eyed decisions where even if you don't get what you thought you wanted, you get an honest answer that says, this is what we're valuing right now.
That's beautiful, thank you. Last question. What are you worried about, and what are you excited about?
I won't take much time on what I'm worried about because you can thankfully now open any publication, you can talk to a friend, and there's a good, healthy, I think at least backlash or fear about the possible downstream and current consequences of big tech and misuse of data. So I won't paint more dystopian pictures, but it goes with what I'm excited about, which is all any technology ever is or was, is just a tool that amplifies and accelerates the consciousness wielding it, which is why there are so many potentially bad consequences from unbelievably powerful tools. It's just accelerating and amplifying the consciousness wielding it. And so what I'm excited about is, and we need to make space for positive imagination, for actually healthy scenarios, so that we can live into those instead of just reacting to what might go wrong. Especially here in this room, people who maybe didn't think of themselves as tech natives or got into it for that reason, who are coming at it from a more dimensional point of view. How do we really attend to the quality of the consciousness wielding the tool? To what are we attending to what are our values? And so instead of only looking for bigger, better, faster, more, convenience and scale, what about love? What about beauty? What about grace? What about belonging? What about healthy flourishing of a planet? How are we asking better questions to get better answers?
Ladies and gentlemen, Srinija Srinivasan. Thank you. So much more there, and hopefully Srinija will hang out a little bit longer so you can engage, but I'm trying to get her to write a book about her experience, and I thought by making her talk to you all, it might get her going in to do that. So let's all help Srinija write that book, or whatever form of technology it is, and people get information out nowadays is. So while I'm announcing a really great new program, let me invite to sit up here, let's see, Dr. Daniel Mikhailov from Data.org, Claire Melamed, and Dr. Shweta Bhogali. And then you're going to come up, Tariq, as well. So while they're coming up, let me make a really great new announcement. We are today, thanks to Tariq and the Welcome Trust, launching a new $6.8 million program to build the capacity of data science around the world. So the Center for Inclusive Growth and the Rockefeller Foundation came together to start an organization called Data.org that Daniel is our CEO of. And as part of that, we had a vision to say we needed to advance and accelerate the field of data science for social impact around the world. Tariq happened to be part of our gang at that point. And as he went back to Welcome, he started working with Welcome to put together a capacity building proposal, a grant to help that vision come to life. And so I'm proud to say that thanks to Tariq and Welcome, he's pulled together with Data.org and others a group of people who are going to talk today about a really exciting initiative that will help expand data capacity building around the world. So over to you, Tariq. And thank you. Welcome.
Fabulous. Thanks. Thanks, Shamina. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm British, so I should start with an apology, being in the US. And I'll apologize. I'm not. My colleague Alan, who actually runs our climate and health division, he couldn't be here for personal reasons. He's a very smart sort of English professor with fabulous hair, but you're stuck with me instead. But if he was here, he'd say the climate crisis is a health crisis, and that we need to use data to understand, adapt to, and mitigate to this new reality. Already we know that in the next 50 years, over 1 billion people will be newly exposed to diseases like dengue, Zika, and chikungunya, because these are climate-sensitive infectious diseases, and the dynamics of these diseases are changing with the climate. It's not just our personal health that's affected, it's also the health of our economies. The ILO estimates that by 2030, something like 2% of productivity will be lost due to heat stress. Those numbers are as high as 5% in Southern Asia and West Africa. It's too hot to work, or you can't work as productively as you could. Again, by 2030, $2.5 trillion of losses. So we have to act for our own health and the health of our economy. So I'm super glad to be announcing the $6.8 million grant to Data.org, the global partnership in JPAL South Asia. And again, really grateful to the Center for Inclusive Growth for being a foundational supporter for Data.org, because it's exactly the kind of platform for partnerships we need to use data to address the complex challenges of our age. So let me turn to people who are much more interesting than I am. And I'll start with you, Daniel. So Dataorg, it's an initiative focused on capacity, and you've zeroed in on talent as the thing to go for. Why talent and why now?
Great. Well, thanks, Tarek, first of all, for enabling this amazing program to happen. So I'm the executive director of Dataorg. We are a platform for partnership to help build the field of data science social impact. And the reason we looked at talent is because we are currently running an amazing array of projects all over the world in data science. And one of the most common problems our grantees tell us again and again is they cannot hire good talent. It's not surprising why. I mean, data is everywhere. It is impossible, therefore, for social impact organizations to compete with the private sector for the best minds coming out of our universities, for the best engineers, the best data scientists. So they're beginning to fall further and further behind. And even the starting point, there was already a huge gap. So this issue is really important and foundational. But it's not just about the numbers. And I think this is where it connects to the great introductory dialogue we just heard. It's about who the data scientists are in this new generation we need and how they think. So we don't just need more data scientists who work for social impact. We want them to be more interdisciplinary, more diverse. We want them to ask questions different in type to the questions they ask now. So fundamentally, data and data science isn't just a technology. It's a huge socio-technical system. It matters who the data scientists are who are asking the questions. Because if they are, for example, a young white man in San Francisco, they might not ask the right questions in the first place. So for us, it's very important to focus on talent, make sure the talent is there, but make sure also it's different in kind. More interdisciplinary, more diverse.
Fabulous. Thanks, Daniel. I'll turn to you, Claire. So at the Global Partnership, amongst many other things, you work with governments to better use data to advance the SDGs. Tell us about some of the opportunities you see in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere.
Thank you, Tarek, and yeah, also huge appreciation for this new program. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to work with some great partners, and I think we're really excited about what we can do together. I'm the CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, a long name in a sector not blessed with short names. And our role with the 650 partners or so in our network is really to close the gap between all the fantastic innovations that are out there that are being developed by social impact organizations, by innovators around the world, to close the gap between the solutions and the problems that governments in particular are facing every day as they try to deal with these problems, these many challenges that we've been hearing about all week. We yesterday released some research that we commissioned from Dolberg Advisors, which suggested that investments in data are a really, really good deal for governments, and that for every dollar governments invest in data systems, in strengthening their entire capacity across the board to produce, to analyze, and critically to use data, they're going to see, on average, about $32 of economic returns. It's an incredibly good investment that pays off right across the board. And so, unsurprisingly, we're seeing huge enthusiasm from governments for taking up these opportunities. We saw yesterday, this is both at the political level. We saw yesterday the president of Botswana on a high-level panel with the UN Deputy Secretary General talking about the importance of data and the commitment in that country to really strengthen their capacity to analyze and use data for decision making. And it extends, of course, unsurprisingly, to the many people at the technical level whose job it is to actually do this. And I think what we're seeing is an incredible kind of optimism and excitement for innovation, for opportunity, and a real confidence in many governments that they, by using data, by mobilizing data, by bringing together the best of what governments have always done in statistics, with the census, with surveys, and all of the opportunities of new technology, they can really take the opportunities, leapfrog over a lot of the systems that, perhaps our governments I come from the UK, are more constrained by, and actually really start to sort of motor forward solving some of these problems. So I think, the case for data has absolutely been made. Governments are hugely enthusiastic, and the challenge and the excitement of this program is really making sure that we develop the human infrastructure, the capacity, as well as the technical infrastructure to really allow governments to do what we know they want to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claire. Data is a great deal. Sweetha, question for you then, finally. JPAL's whole jam is putting scientific evidence into policy. Tell us how a workforce of data-savvy professionals is going to help with that.
So a program like this is going to be a huge boost for JPAL's mission, which is centered around the effective use of data for robust policy making. And aligned with what we just heard, that investments in data are extremely beneficial for governments. There has been there's a rapid progress in the digitization of administrative records or improved access to novel data sets through satellite imagery or remote sensing, text analysis. All of these are just wonderful opportunities for researchers to engage with this data creatively towards evaluating social policies, which then contribute to the design of new and improved policies that could help transform development outcomes at scale. And so a team of highly motivated and skilled data scientists is going to be a tremendous asset towards the cycle of evaluation and design. And so programs like this are absolutely vital. They're the need of the hour in the regions that need them the most. And JPAL is very excited to be a partner.
Wonderful. Thank you all for this brilliant Express panel. Please join me in thanking Sweetha, Claire, and Daniel. Cool. And I'm going to hand back to you, Shanna.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to do a bit of adding a few chairs and a scene change for a moment. While they're doing that, while they're bringing in a few chairs, are there any seats available next to you? If you do have one, raise a hand. Looks like we've got one in the front row over here, a few extra ones. Great. So if you're listening out there, come on in. While they're doing that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the next thing we're going to do, which is what we're calling Impact in a Minute. The idea behind this, and I told them 1 minute in all seriousness. The idea is that we have a number of grantees that are doing incredible work across sectors, across issue areas, across regions. And so I wanted to give a chance for them as we're transitioning between each thing to come up and give us a quick spotlight, a 1 minute impact spotlight. So something that they're working on, something that they're interested in or would like to share with you as an audience today. So with that, I believe our first Impact in a Minute on the list is going to be from Trooper Sanders, who is the CEO of BDT Trust. Trooper's right here. There we go.
Hello, everyone. So if you live in the United States or work in the United States, I'll be a bit parochial, think about an issue that you care about and worry about. It could be the racial reckoning and racial inequality. It could be digital opportunity. It could be the climate crisis and particularly its health and economic impact that it is going to have on traditionally excluded communities. Well, we at Benefits Data Trust believe that the $80 billion worth of social safety net programs across healthcare, education, nutrition, home heating can be public service capital deployed to address those issues and serve those communities. And we've been really proud since our work with the Mastercard Center to have served 220,000 households and individuals to help them get $1 billion worth of those benefits that meet their practical needs. Thank you. Yes. I have an amazing group of people who work on that. But here's the deal. We know that we can't put the full force of the American social safety net to address the climate crisis, to address racial inequality by going household to household to household. And that's why my colleagues and me, we're on a 10-year journey to solve this $80 billion gap and working with government and others to make sure that, frankly, people who need help and are excluded and marginalized can get the help, frankly, as easy as those of us who are better off get the support that we need. Those of you who collect the home mortgage deduction, think how easy it is for you to get it. Compare that to how hard it is for someone to get a couple $100s for food assistance. How do we do that? Data is literally in our middle name. Data analytics and applying the tools of machine learning are critical. Building better infrastructure for data sharing and data matching with state governments. And then third, I like to really think about fusing the worlds of code and prose, because as was discussed, this is more than about digits. This is about the socio-technical. This is about infusing the politics, the organizational, into truly mobilizing data for good. So if you want to nerd out on benefits, call us. But if you care about any other issue, I can show you a good time with this $80 billion that's left on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Trooper. We have great taste in grantees, don't you think? The next thing we have is the panel, the first panel today. So I'd like to invite the panelists up. Here comes Kate, and you can go ahead and come take your seats up here. This is your mic, I think. Oh, you're mic'd. Excellent. Go ahead. Yeah.
Great. Well, hello everyone. I think this is just such a wonderful bookend to a week of conversations about global development. We all heard from the UN Secretary General earlier this week that the digital public infrastructure is a way to turbocharge recovery from COVID, and it's also a way to turbocharge an inclusive economic growth. And data is obviously a really important part of that. And I know that everybody is here in this room today because we understand that everybody can benefit from opening and sharing and collaborating around data to make decisions and improve efficiency and tackle some of the world's biggest societal challenges. And there's enormous opportunity to unlock the power of data, but it must be unlocked in a responsible way. And I'm thrilled to introduce the panel today. We have a stellar panel of experts to really help us understand the importance of data responsibility in global development, talking about principles, values, and governance. So please join me in welcoming Jenna Slotin, who's the Senior Director of Strategy, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, Dr. Ravi Shankar Chaturvedi, who's the Director of Research at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, Dr. Miguel Luengo-Oroz, who's the Senior Advisor on Emerging Technologies at UN Global Pulse, and I understand the first data scientist working for the UN, so you probably have some good stories too. Yes. And Guyan Perez, who's the Head of Data and Technology at UNDP. But Jenna, let me start with you. I understand that this has been a very busy week for Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. I know that my team has actually taken some of your team's time, so thank you for that. For one thing, you recently launched a white paper that's a roadmap for placing values at the centre of and the heart of data. Can you just tell us a little bit about the white paper and the Data Values Project?
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to talk about the Data Values Project. So, as you said, it is exactly that, a sort of a global campaign and a roadmap to put people and values at the heart of data in global development, and to really ensure that people are sharing equally in the benefits of data and technology. So over the last year and a half or so, we spoke to over 300 people in over 60 countries and pulled together and distilled from those discussions, first a white paper, and then a 5-point manifesto for action, which we launched yesterday, called the Data Values Manifesto. And what it really does, and I was so humbled to hear your insights earlier in the keynote, because it really is a recognition of the need to put values at the center and to realize that each of us has different values as well, and that framing is so incredibly important. So what the Data Values Manifesto is really emphasizing is it's calling for giving people greater control over whether and how they're measured and if and how their data is going to be used. It calls for investing in open and inclusive systems. It calls for increasing people's data confidence and skills. And it calls for strengthening the breadth of engagement in data governance to promote transparency and accountability. So there's a really strong emphasis on inclusion and participation. And the reason is exactly because we all come with these very different perspectives. And we build systems, and we need to invest in digital public infrastructure. And we see massive and rapid digitization, but we can't do that on our own, in one entity, in one institution. We need to partner, of course, and we need to work across stakeholders, but we also need to talk and engage the individuals who the data is about and the communities who are affected. The manifesto and the white paper and the work that we have done with partners and intend to do with partners doesn't assume that you can consult every person all the time, but it does unpack what it might mean to incorporate more participatory mechanisms of data governance alongside the really important regulatory frameworks that we need and enforcement mechanisms that we need and institutions that we need. So that scrutiny and engagement with people who are affected will breed greater accountability in those governance systems. And we came to these ideas from discussion with individuals and groups and communities that are already doing this around the world to great effect, and we're keen to explore how to do that further. So for example, working with queer data activists in Uganda, where the dilemma of advocating for being included in the data is incredibly important because otherwise they miss out on services. But the risk of being included in that data in that country is incredibly high. Just as an anecdote from a colleague of ours, when a list of 100 names of individuals who attended a workshop were published in the newspaper with calls for violence against that community, and they had not consented to have their data shared. So what are the implications? And what does it mean to work at the community level to wrestle with these tensions and to build systems that really acknowledge this? So the campaign is working really hard to center some underrepresented voices. And we have, alongside this campaign, have launched a data advocates program where we're working to engage individuals from a range of countries and provide them with the resources and the tools to advocate for this. And then we're also working across partners to take a lot of the ideas in the white paper, a lot of the ideas that have come from our partners, and implement new ways of working and new ways of thinking about putting values at the heart of data. Thanks.
Thanks, such important work. And where can people find the white paper?
Yes. So, data4sdgs.org/data-values.
Excellent.
That's a number 4.
Yeah. I'll turn to Miguel. So you were the first data scientist at the UN 10 years ago, so I know you have many perspectives on the alignment of data governments and global development goals. How do you think data governance can help with the global development goals that we have today?
Okay, well, first I'm Miguel. I work for UN Global Pulse, which is the innovation lab of the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I mean, what we do is trying to anticipate, build, and share innovations around the responsible use of technology, and in particular, like data and AI. And I mean, looking back, like the story and the trajectory, I think some years ago, we were talking about like discovering methodologies. I mean, what is possible, like testing it. Then we started to see the impact, measure the impact, operationalize the projects. I mean, across our 4 labs, we have done like many projects. I mean, all over the world, from food security, human rights, infodemics, name it. Then I think the community, we started to think about when we have to say no, and we have to take more care around potential risk and harms. I guess that many people in this room spend more time saying no than yes to some of the projects that are offered, just because of those ethical values. And I think the moment where we are now is, okay, next step is scale. And for that, for building that infrastructure, we need data governance. Okay, and this is where we are. And my intuition is that actually, though we're still working at high-level principles, we are going to decline those principles depending on the fields, something that happened with health, so you have regulations for medical devices, but I think we will have to start mechanisms, regulatory mechanisms for different fields. And this is going to go side by side with talent. I totally, I believe that we have now a new generation of people that are going to be fluent in data, but also fluent in other disciplines. That is totally key. So, I guess that this is where we are. Looking values, just another reflection, and this is one. Data governance also helps operationalize some of the values. Okay, and when I look to the list of principles for AI data principles or AI principles, one that typically miss is solidarity. Okay, solidarity is not is in more, I think it's more than 1/3 of the constitutions of the world, but it's almost never in our list of AI principles. And for me, solidarity is digital public goods, is this public infrastructure, and it's something that we don't talk too much, I think, is also share the burdens. Okay, because we are now pushing to share the good part, but even in health, we have a public health emergency, but shall we have something like public data emergency? I don't know. Really, we need to think also on how solidarity can operationalize, with data governance, and not just in the good cases, but also in the emergencies. Now we're in the middle of quite a few of them.
No, thank you. And continuing on this sort of topic of data governance, Ravi, I'll turn to you. Your team has been doing a lot of work in this area in 51 countries around the world. Can you share a little bit about what you see as perhaps the opportunities and the challenges in this space?
Thanks, Kate. That's a terrific question. So I represent Digital Planet. We have the pleasure of having been Mastercard's partner and the Center's partner for over a decade and a half, 12 years now, give or take. So Shamina, thanks for this partnership. We've been building scorecards for the digital economy. So we look at several aspects, the digital competitiveness of nations, digital trust, what we call the gross data product, the new GDP of the world, and the ease of doing digital business ever since the World Bank moved away from trying to measure the ease of doing business. In each of these dimensions, data governance has been a key aspect, and we decided to take a deeper dive. But even before I get there, I kind of want to talk about why this matters at a personal level for inclusion at large. So when we look at inclusion around the world, we've made great strides in connecting about 6 in 10 people around the world today. Still a long way to go, but this has not been short of miraculous. However, what we're also seeing is large swaths of the global south are becoming data rich before they become economically rich. Now, how and whether these data riches translate into economic well-being, equitable economic well-being, is a function of how this data gets governed. And we've been seeing this inclusion paradox. A lot of the work that we do in collaboration with the center is really to close that gap between digital inclusion and inclusive economic growth. We call that the inclusion paradox because those data riches aren't exactly translating into economic riches, and to the speaker who came before us, who said who's benefiting and at whose cost. And we need to really look at to what extent these data riches are benefiting the folks whose data it really belongs. So that's one point. So now, in order to build, so data governance is incredibly complex. You can, it's also a pretty dry subject. But I'll try to make it interesting. So we partnered with our friends at the George Washington University, the data governance hub at George Washington, and they helped us think through this, the Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub. They helped us to think through this, and they charted this out across 51 countries. These 51 countries are chosen from the 100 countries that we study at Digital Planet. And they laid out a pretty nice framework for us to look at. They looked at about 6 dimensions. There could be more, about 6 dimensions: strategic, regulatory. Does a country have a strategy around data? Regulatory, what kind of legal regimes are you putting in place? Structural, are there any structural changes you're making to accommodate this new aspect of the economy called the digital economy? Responsibility, are you thinking about ethics and responsible use of data? Participatory, are you inviting others? Who's at the table? Is the third sector at the table? Is the private sector at the table? Who has a voice in making decisions around data? And then lastly, international, to what extent are you collaborating? Because the value of data is in the exchange and the free flow of it, and meaningful within us. So of the 51 countries that we studied, the main takeaways, and I'll share we'll find a way of sharing the report for those of you who are finding it hard to sleep or have a long flight ahead of you. But shall we say, the big takeaway from this is, if you were to think of maturity in data governance, countries are really all over the place. So the more free and liberal and democratic societies are, the more participatory their data regimes tend to be, the more international their data regimes tend to be. And shall we say, they also lean more towards responsible use of data. Illiberal regimes, on the other hand, tend to have a strategy and tend to have regulations more about what to do with their own data. So there is that. And so, the big takeaway here is really institutions shape their digital economies and data governance in their likeness. So that's, so if I were to give you a punchline on this, to what extent is this, to what extent are responsibility and governance of data relevant to economic growth? I think it is the keystone in really turning these data riches into equitable economic dividends.
No, thanks, Ravi. And I think it's such an interesting, the paradox you mentioned, that countries can be data rich before being economically rich. I'll turn to Guyan. Look, the UNDP probably understands better than anyone that not one sector, not one organisation, can lead the work of ensuring responsible use of data. How can we create data collaboratives and frameworks for data governance while preserving our data responsibilities at all levels?
Thank you, Kate. So I remember, before answering that question, I remember I did a cute little project in my previous job around the GA to see what are the topics most talked about during the GA. And for a few years running, it's about climate change and poverty. But this year, if someone did that project, I'm pretty sure it's partnerships, and especially private sector and coming together in this journey as well. And that is true for data as well. So my job in UN Development Program is twofold. Actually, one is UNDP's internal data transformation, but also now advising member states and countries on their data transformation journey. Also, my background in technology allows me to advise them on digitalization and digital transformation as well. I feel like I'm in the Chief Digital Office, so I have to talk about digitalization when I talk about data as well. I mean, in the past few years, I feel like I've seen a lot, and I've seen in countries in different stages of maturity, and I've seen systems implemented, like online education systems implemented without even thinking about getting parents' consent before registering minors into a system, from countries completely bringing systems on public services online only when their population, like 50% of the population is still not connected. I can sit here and talk about problems all day, but our digital strategy at UNDP is now focusing on that holistic, inclusive approach, the digital public infrastructure. And part of that is actually the digital ID systems, the digital finance systems, and data exchanges as well. And when it comes to data, one of the I used to work for a citizens campaign as well, and one of the biggest problems I'm seeing is trust. Trust in people, trust in the actors in this field, and trust in government as well, obviously. And the only way to build that trust is while there's no cookie cutter solution that applies at local level when it comes to data governance, but to have these data governance frameworks which allows for accountability, transparency, and the principles and the values that we care for, to put people at the center of development. And I think UNDP's unique value proposition here is our broader mandate, and also our ability to bring people together in that mandate. And probably you talked about bringing everyone to the table, and that is what we can do because of our presence in the country.
No, thank you. I had the opportunity earlier this week to hear from the Minister of Rwanda, who was Minister of ICT from Rwanda. And she was talking about the fact that perhaps one of the benefits of COVID is she now feels like she doesn't have to preach to convert about the power of digital transformation and use of data. She's now preaching to the converted. So that is perhaps looking for a silver lining. That might be it. I know we have time for a few questions for the panel. So please just feel free to put your hand up.
Thank you, and that was a very spirited discussion. My name is Ishwar. I come from Jobs for the Future, and I have worked with the IMF and the World Bank in my previous avatar. So my question to Jenna here. So when you talked about the data value manifesto and giving people the right to choose to opt in or opt out and kind of have a say in the data that they provide, but my question is, how informed or how much knowledge do people have to make that decision based on their own self-interest or the wider interest of the society itself that the data kind of helps with? So if you can answer that, it'll be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. It's a great question. I don't have the answer or even a near perfect answer. I think, though, that one thing that came out clearly when we spoke to a lot of different stakeholders in many different countries and different sectors working in different ways is that there's a sort of a myth around fully informed consent that we're really never going to get to. Recognizing that, then, the question becomes about how to get more informed consent. But then it's also about, and I actually am starting to use less the term data literacy and more the term data confidence, which was brought out in our consultation by a partner, because the notion of data confidence is something that I think anyone in society at whatever level, socioeconomic level or what have you, can aspire to. It's the capability to understand what's being asked of you. So it's not about the spreadsheet, but what's being asked of you and what the implications might be for a scenario in which your data may be used or not. But then also I want to emphasize that at that individual level, I think we will never get what we're looking for. I think there's a community level piece. Because there are often situations where someone like me may consent, and a system may make population level decisions that impact me in an adverse way. There's a lot of automated decision making in the allocation of social welfare or in, penal decisions in a correctional system, all kinds of things like that. And there, that's where a kind of consultative and more participatory mechanism seems, at least from our work so far, to be quite promising, because it's less about individual consent in that case and more about consulting with organizations that represent affected communities, people who are empowered by virtue of who they represent, or setting up mechanisms that have diverse perspectives to consult on a system and the implications of that system, to think through and ask the 3 questions as you build a system. So, because the onus can't only be on the individual. It's not realistic, I think, going forward. So I think just expanding is a useful direction.
Thanks, Jenna. Up the back.
Hi, my name is Mark Blumenthal. I'm Executive Director of the Social Ventures Foundation. And I just wanted to point out or ask a question about the digital divide and the what I would call the income divide. The income divide on this planet continues to grow wider and wider. and the poor have stayed poor. And I think the big issue here is the fact that nobody wants to invest at the bottom of the pyramid. Everybody is risk adverse. And therefore, with that said, how are we going to be able to use this data not only to point out the problems, but also the solutions, and most importantly, the solutions that could bring impact investors down the risk-averse ladder to make investments at the bottom of the pyramid, because that's the only way things are going to change, because they haven't. Thank you.
Who would like to take that one?
Probably try to answer that question. And this is a common theme as well. Whenever now when we talk to a government, they say, well, don't tell us about the problem, tell us about the solution. UNDP specifically, especially is trying to, using data, also first of all, identify the problem in a framework that we have developed as well, not just looking at a specific sector, but taking the whole of society approach, like you said, how can we invest on capacity, how can we invest on regulation, how can we invest on infrastructure, how can we invest in the business ecosystem as well, so they can thrive on the digital public infrastructure we are building. And also UNDP is now part of the Digital Public Goods Alliance as well, so not just pointing the problem, but pointing out at the solution as well. Here's something that has worked in another country, you can take it and scale it as well. So now more and more we are looking at the solution side of things, and I just came back from a meeting as well on bringing some of the offers that are available in the development sector together. So if a government comes to us and asks, okay, what can you do here? We have a catalog of solutions that are readily available that can be deployed.
Maybe just to complement, I was merging this question with something around data values and inclusion. Something also interesting is those that don't even have the option to opt in. Okay, and I mean, thinking even on when we have one program called Leave No Voice Behind, and essentially is in the world there are 7,000 languages, and in the digital space you just have 100, and really with NLP models or AI applications you have just a few. So what happened with the other more than 6,000 languages? So I mean, it can be the owners of those languages, those communities that will decide whether they want to be or not. But maybe it would be, I mean, it's important to give them the option, and maybe this is inclusion, is having maybe that richness, that's all these cultures, all these languages online. I mean, I think that will open many more opportunities, because the reality is that seems that most of the solutions came from the same place and even are in the same language, but that gives the same perspective probably.
Thanks, Miguel. Well, we're almost out of time. Okay, so lightning round. In 15 seconds or less, what is the one thing you want people to walk out of the room with today when they think about data responsibility? Jenna.
Darn, I have to go first. Okay, well, I would say data values, but I'm going to say, so the multiplicity of perspectives is what's so critical. So I love Srinija's 3 questions. And the key is that not just that you're asking the question, but that you're getting a diversity of answers to that question. That is what is so critical.
Ravi.
Institutions shape their digital economies in their likeness. Demand better of your institutions.
Yes, to complement, I think I take the word trust. And trust is not trustworthy technology. That is technology that works as it should. Trust is technology that humans can trust, and I think we have to anticipate what is coming. Okay, so my point is we have to put ourselves in the future and think what scenarios we want and how we're going to make that trust happen, and not just with the data that we generate today, but the one we will generate tomorrow. I mean, maybe it's about neurotechnologies, maybe it's about something else. So we have to be there.
Like to say, because I talked about a lot of problems, I would like to say hope. There's more now, because of the pandemic, we see more and more everyone coming together, all the actors coming together. No single actor can solve these problems. So there's hope, there's willingness. We see a lot of willingness, especially during this week. There were a lot of pledges made as well. So there is hope. and we will make it happen.
I like ending on hope. I think we are in a turbulent time. I think whether we're talking about the climate crisis or the education crisis, we are in many ways in the eye of the storm. But there is hope, and I think the fact that we're having this conversation and everybody in this room is reason for that hope as well. So please join me in thanking the panel.
Yep, that worked. All right, thank you for our first panel. I would like to invite our next Impact in a Minute speaker up. That will be Dr. Aaron Schroeder of the Biocomplexity Institute at the University of Virginia.
Hello, everybody. So the project that we are working on under the auspices of the Center for Inclusive Growth, thank you very much, is what we call the Social Impact Data Commons. I believe I heard on the last panel somebody refer to Data Commons talk as dry. I don't accept that whatsoever. I think it's at the forefront of everything that's exciting that's going on, definitely at the local level of governance. In a nutshell, what we're doing is in the National Capital Region, if you don't know what that is, DC, all the counties and localities in Virginia and Maryland that surround DC, in the Northern Capital Region, we are working directly with localities to develop new data sets, new measures, and new data tools for developing these data sets to help them make equity-informed decisions about issues that they're concerned with today. We just heard a question about digital divide. Every one of the localities that we work with has a broadband equity concern. Right? They have equity concerns across many dimensions. That's one of the ones that we've helped focus on. Right? If you think about it, there is no data set that exists that tells you this part of a county has broadband equity, this part does not have broadband equity, right? It's a complex issue. And for local decision makers to make decisions about this, they need to know a number of things. They need to know, does the infrastructure exist? Can you get high-speed broadband in these different parts of my county? What about where people live, right? What are the demographics of the people who are trying to get this service? What are the household characteristics of the people trying to get these service, right? These data sets don't exist below the county level. And more than that, they don't exist in the geographies that matter to decision makers at the local level. For example, in Arlington County, where we started, many of the decisions are made at the civic association level and their county board meetings, right? That means census tract demographics are not necessarily helpful in that decision making, right? So we work to translate those in a statistically valid way to the geographies that matter to them. Also find out, from Ookla, the download rates, get them in that same geography. Household characteristics in that same geography, so that they can actually look at all of these different maps and measures and triangulate on a decision that needs to be made. Right? We started out in Arlington. Familiar with the area. We are now moving into phase 2 with Fairfax County, which is the largest county in Virginia. I'm very happy to say, one of the reasons I brought up, we're doing a lot of issues with the broadband one. That data, those maps, just this past month actually got used by their county board of supervisors to make decisions on how they're going to allocate resources, because they're being asked to deal with broadband equity. And they don't know what that means, or at the local level, it means, okay, where am I going to send the money, right? We're trying to give them the tools so they can figure out where they can send the money and why in a defensible manner, right? In phase 3, we're going to be expanding to the entire National Capital Region. A lot of the data sets that we're creating right now and tools are already covering that. And the overall goal is that we'll actually be able to do regional analysis and planning and decision making across all of the localities of the NCR. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I think that place-based decision-making is a big focus when we talk about impact data science. I think that's just a great example of that. I think our panel is also going to be a great way to talk about this. So I'd like to invite up our panel with Lauren, Uyi, and with Francesca right here in the front. Here.
Afternoon, everybody. We are the only thing standing between us and break. But don't worry, this is going to be the next 25 minutes is going to change your life. And you're going to walk out of here knowing everything you need to know. No pressure at all. I only have to ask the questions. I don't have to answer them, so I can set that up. I do want to flag that we will leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So start thinking about those as we're going through the panel now. So we'll have those ready for our panelists when we conclude the first part of this discussion. I want to say thank you to Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth for bringing us all together. As someone told me earlier this week that there had been so much revenge travel where everybody wanted to go out and vacation, after being locked up, and this was Revenge Unga Week. We had you hadn't done it in a couple of years, and so we've packed everything in, and this is a great way to end this week. So thank you all for joining us today. I am very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Uwe Stewart, who is the Chief Data and Technology Officer at Data.org, and Francesca Bosco, did I get that correct, from the Cyber Peace Institute, where she is the Chief of Strategy. And we're going to talk today a little bit about what do nonprofit social impact organizations need in order to utilize the data and tools that are available to them now. All of us in this room know the power that data and data tools can unlock, but how we land that with organizations that are working on these issues that are so critical so that they can scale and have real impact is really the question that we're trying to unlock through this conversation. So Francesca, let me start with you. CyberPeace works on these cybersecurity issues and helping nonprofits address that very difficult gap. That is a big area. What do you hear from organizations that they need the most?
Thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much for the question. And well, allow me to say, you mentioned it's a big thing. Well, thanks to Mastercard, I have to say, well, Microsoft and the Hewlett Foundation, they gave us an ambitious plan. So basically, the mission of the Institute is to, as an NGO, to basically protect the most vulnerable from cyber threats. And I'm saying it's an ambitious plan because it requires an intertwined set of activities that goes from what we call assistance, so talking and supporting other NGOs. It goes through a key part that's one of the biggest challenge that other organizations are facing, which is, let's say, kind of like data awareness and maturity when it comes to understanding the threat, analyzing the threat, and then having what I would call actionable knowledge to then move forward to find solutions. But also the third part, which is advocate for it, meaning that we heard also before some hints towards, for example, regulatory frameworks, so policies, because this is not happening in a vacuum. One of the key things that I think it's important to, let's say, elevate the cybersecurity discussion at is that it's kind of like across all the sectors, and that's also what the Institute would like to do. So in the range of organizations that we are working with, we have organizations that have a fairly good understanding, for example, of technology and cyber-related issues, but we also work with a lot of civil society organizations, for example, in developing countries, namely in this moment, East Africa and LATAM, where, I mean, their main issue is support education in schools or work on violence against women. So honestly, cybersecurity is not on top of their mind. And this is exactly what we would like to do. How we do it. So I think there are, let's say, 4 quick action that comes to my mind. One is, as mentioned, provide the data and knowledge. A practical example, if you go on our website, we started during the pandemic. And one of the key sectors that we immediately identify as most vulnerable was the healthcare sector. So for example, we said, okay, WHO has a great platform to show attacks against hospitals, so physical attacks against hospitals. And we said there's nothing that is showing, on one hand, attacks cyber attacks against hospitals, but also what's happening to people. Because one of the problems that we have with data, especially for non-data, let's say, science or well-versed people, is that they don't understand why it's so relevant. And so we developed this platform that is also showing, for example, okay, a cyber attack hit a hospital. What it means in terms of like ambulances redirected, what means in terms of like vaccines that could not be delivered. Same thing we're doing, for example, since February, in terms of like attacks against the civilian infrastructure within the context of the conflict in Ukraine. Again, I was participating to a meeting about the role of cyber in Ukraine, in the Ukraine conflict. And I'm tired of people that are saying, oh, I mean, we haven't seen a major cyber attack. Yes, it's true. Can I tell you, people are targeted every day by cyber attacks because they target, for example, public administration. So they don't have access to services. A wake-up call was, for example, in January this year when the International Committee of the Red Cross was attacked. They were attacked by a data breach. And everybody reported basically that, the amount of data that was stolen. There's another problem that to kind of like contain the data breach, they had to stop the service. And these are things that people don't talk about. So it's important, the data dimension, but data means also the life of people. And in the specific case, it was a family restoration service, so people could not access that service in that time. And just to mention, I mentioned for let's say, dimension. One is understanding the data, collecting, analyzing, and understanding data. Build capacity, and it was mentioned at the very beginning, because again, we cannot take it for granted. Build capacity for organization, build capacity for donors, because, where to invest the money, and also being a responsible enabler of cybersecurity of their grantees. And also build capacity when it comes, for example, to policymakers that need to take decision. And I would say also, well, partnership was mentioned before, but we recently participated to, we are supporting and we will join a recently launched initiative by NetHope, USAID and Okta on building an ISAC for civil society organizations. So yeah, these are the things that comes to my mind. Thanks.
It was great to see that initiative and nonprofits coming together and really helping one another and learning from one another, because that relevant and that peer-to-peer sharing is so important. Data.org has really, taken a broad look at sort of where organizations need support. And as Francesca mentioned, organizations are at all different levels of data maturity, in terms of whether they're just starting or whether they're quite advanced. How is Data.org looking at making sure the right resources get to organizations at the right time?
Thank you, Laura. Check. Can you hear me? Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Again, thank you. One size cannot and does not fit all. I think that's where we're starting from. And we have at Data.org a preliminary tool that we call data maturity assessment that allows you to track your evolution and trajectory. Again, going back to this concept that one size cannot and does not fit all. That's the broad lens which we look at it. But then is the then what? What do we do next, right? So depending on where you are, how do you move from point A to point B? Very recently, Data.org, in partnership with the McGovern Foundation, released a report that looked at the social impact sector and say, the sector is being left behind in its ability to leverage this data that is everywhere. In particular, the struggle is workforce wanted, capacity. Out of the report, there was a quadrant that was released. One, we have to be intentional how we grow existing talent, those that are already in the sector. We also have to be intentional how we grow new talent coming in. And then there is another quadrant around transitional talent. Now, these are labels, I explain them shortly. And then finally, leadership. What this means really is, within social impact sector,
There are those who are already working, but they struggle with the tools of data science. Canonical data science is high-skilled. It's all about optimization. As you've heard from several people today, including my boss, Daniel, right, is that we need a new class of data scientists who are focused on solving problems. We need to get to impact. So in a way, we have to find a way to move them from I skills to T skills or M skills. That's part of our mission for those who are already existing and those coming in. Now, what about transitional? These are people who already have a set of skills in related industry and are eyeballing social impact. I think that in the human essence, we all want to do good. The question is there a pathway from one field into the other? This is what we'll call transitional. And part of what we're doing is also building a set of artifacts to help those who are already working in some related industry to find their way to work in the social impact sector. And then finally, and this is key, I think I've heard it today, data is ultimately about making decisions. Thank you, Srinivasan. You made a fantastic point today. It's about we have to make decisions. Well, leadership, especially across the low, medium income countries, the leaders ultimately call the shot. How are we equipping them with data skills to ultimately make those decisions? And that's the fourth component of our quadrant. So in a nutshell, one size does not fit all, just to recap, and one size cannot fit all. So what we've done is to build this trajectory of maturity that is anchored upon our quadrant, which is the pathway to grow in data science skills, from those entering to those making decisions at the leadership level.
And I suspect that there's a demand for not just, sort of core data science skills, but, data adjacent skills, analytics, better decision making, those types of things.
Absolutely. I have this thing in my head that optimization, which is what canonical data scientists focus on, is just one slice of the problem. It's about localization meeting optimization. Because at the end of the day, right, models themselves are deficient because you are looking for strong features in your model. But what exists in countries are weak features. We need a new class of data scientists who are interdisciplinary. That is, they understand the relationship across domains. Tariq, you said the climate crisis is a health crisis. What that does is bring two domains together. Canonical data scientists only focus on verticals. What we are looking for are those who can connect across verticals and therefore localize the kinds of insights that we need to support decision making.
Can I add just? Yes. Can I add just one quick comment? You nailed it because, for example, when I mentioned before capacity building, the way that we're doing capacity building is we have one program that is called Cyberpeace Builders. What original, but I mean Cyberpeace Builders, meaning helping civil society organization matching for free, matching them with corporate volunteers. These corporate volunteers are the highly skilled people that you mentioned. So we have like amazing, for example, data scientists coming from, Microsoft, Mastercard, many companies that are volunteering their time for free, and we match them with the need of civil society organization. One of the two challenges we had. One is they're very good in data science, they're not very good in soft skills. And so, for example, in terms of like capacity building, think about it also to, let's say, kind of like couple it also with building it around the human. And so again, for example, we developed specifically a training on soft skills for our volunteers. And the other super important thing that you mentioned is the localization dimension, because exactly one size doesn't fit all. And so when we run the Cyberpeace Builders program, we launched it in Geneva and we tested in Geneva. Geneva is very different from Nairobi, right? And so we had to go through several iterations of the process, let's say, and test the model. And then we understood that we can only build capacity if we have, for example, regional coordinator that are based in, for example, in that case, one is in Nairobi and the other one is Bogota, and is really creating also what it was mentioned before, trust. Because before you ask, I mean, what is the need and what, for example, organizations are telling that they would like to see? Well, even before starting the conversation, they need to trust us, because they would open basically their server, their databases, and so on and so forth. So yeah, thanks.
Absolutely.
This is great. I don't have to ask questions. I mean, that was literally the next question I was going to ask you. But I think it is. I mean, DataKind uses a lot of volunteers as well, and it is a wonderful opportunity to bring in external talent. But there is that translation to the unique scenarios that the individual organizations that you're working with. I want to ask you both a slightly different question on capacity, because you've both sort of hinted at it, which is, how do we address not just the building capacity at the organizational level, but really at the sector-wide level? And what I mean by that is, yes, we also have to address at the leadership level, but we also have capacity gaps at the government level, where we have data collection that we often obviously use for that, and with our donors. All of the donors in this room are completely exempted from that. You're brilliant and doing a great job. But I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are struggling to figure out, how do they put the right resources in the right place in order to support these organizations. And I wonder if you have any thoughts around, is it, building great examples and showing how this work can have such an impact? Is it, including those communities in these conversations as well, to the point earlier about being inclusive in our conversations? Or is it something else that maybe we haven't tapped into yet?
Please.
Oh, thank you. I would like to bring some examples of what we are experiencing. So government. So what happened is that, for example, as I mentioned, we started working on basically on attacks against what is called critical infrastructure, but specifically for us was a critical sector serving a population in a very critical situation like the pandemic. And thanks to our work, we started receiving, so we did two things. One is support policymakers. So we started participating in high-level policy debates, like, for example, the open-ended working group at the UN and different other forums, like the Paris Peace Forum and so on. And what we were doing is, this is basically data evidence, data-backed knowledge that you can use. And so we started receiving questions like, okay, how can we work with you? Because we don't have that type of knowledge. And so we had one specific program, for example, with the government of Czech Republic for developing a compendium on enhancing cyber resilience in the healthcare sector. And we were kind of like explaining the importance of data and what is behind the data. Another example is with, for example, community of donors. Recently, at the beginning of the week, I was in Zurich with basically a philanthropist community. And one of the things that they asked was, okay, what's, for example, the potential that we have when it comes to understanding the type of threats that our grantees are facing, and also how we can be agent of change. So I think there is one hand which is, okay, better policies, but also better actions. And to this end, so I think what I would like to see is what I call the responsible donorship sort of like movement, which is, first of all, as a donor, you need to enhance your awareness and understanding, in this case about cyber threats, but also how you can kind of like be an enabler of change for your grantees. And the third dimension is, before I think, the SDGs were mentioned. How many times cybersecurity is mentioned in the SDGs? It's an easy one, none. So, and I'm sorry to say, it's, let's have a caveat, which is when the SDGs were thought about. But if technology is an enabler, then you need to have cybersecurity, because you cannot have right to education, right to health, when you don't secure the systems that you're using. So this is, I think, the third one where we are having quite some challenges. And if you have any ideas, please let me know, because this is also something that we are advocating for when it comes to different communities. And it's fairly challenging.
Yes. In my career, I've spent some time on the ground in Africa, working with governments to get them all to go on that last mile, which is use the data for decisions. And I'm going to shamelessly admit it's a struggle. Claire, you're here. You know what I'm talking about. It's a struggle. However, I think it was about 2 months ago, I had this esoteric conversation with Daniel. And I was saying, we cannot abandon governments because especially in low, medium income countries, there's no workaround. They are still the biggest spender and they still make those decisions on behalf of the population. So what gives? In that conversation, we said we need to start to build counterfactuals because governments and government officials make decisions that are time-bound, and their incentives are driven by, 3 years, 4 years, the next election cycle. Can we show them what they are afraid of and what the consequence will be if they don't make the right decision? It's a different way of thinking. So typically, you want to go teach data science and teach them the use of data to make decisions. But why don't we shift the needle a little bit, help them to manage better by showing them counterfactuals? That's a different use of data. In fact, that's the kind of data science that we are trying to promote.
And I think it's such an important element in how we're all really related, and there's such an important role for well-informed donors and well-informed governments to encourage the social sector to adopt this, because we all have to move forward together. So I want to open it up for questions. There are hands up. Okay, good. That's encouraging. There are microphones coming. Let's see if we can't get in a couple of questions. Right here. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Bill Sutherland from Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I guess my question is for Yuya. Can you say a little bit more about your thoughts on the granularity and training of data science? You indicated that we need to try and different types, you would seem to be implying different pathways of training for different types of data science. Talk a little bit more about that. That's something we're interested in.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you, Bill. Let me break it down into 3 components. First is the curriculum itself. And then I'll talk about the personnel, the practitioner. And then I'll land with the location. But first, the curriculum itself. Canonical data science right now, like I said a few minutes ago, it's all about optimization. And a lot of the mechanics that we use in canonical data science, whether it's R or Python, teaches you to take a set of variables and use any model that comes to you to optimize on those variables. And then you spit out an outcome, which is great. But the challenges that we face, especially in low, medium income countries, are systemic. So we have to broaden the aperture. In particular, and this is the answer to your question, to shift from just a featural fixation, which is what optimization is, to problem-centric. It's a shift into social science, what Daniel calls social tech. Do I understand the problem and the interactions within the problem set? That's the new kind of data science that we are talking about here. And the curriculum is still on the way. Do you want to say something, Bill?
Yes, I do.
Yes, please.
I can speak loudly. How much of your thinking that you are applying to low and middle income countries can be translated to low and middle income communities in this country?
It's a great question. The way I answer that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs speaks about all communities, whether I'm in Nairobi, Kenya, or I am in inner city, New York. Our needs are the same, right? And what we are advocating in this new approach to data science is let's focus on these commonalities in the needs that we have. If I am broke and poor in Lagos, I am broke and poor in New York. Right? And the systemic things that trigger that poverty may vary, but it's to understand what poverty looks like and therefore begin to use the variables within the data set to offer insights towards decision making.
I know that anytime we've gotten to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the conversation has gotten to a great point. And I see lots of hands, and I would love to be able to accommodate those, but I need to make sure that we get to, we have time for one more? Thank you. We have time for one more.
Hi, my name is Sarah Nakintu. I work at Facebook, and I realize I'm part of the problem. But I wanted to ask you from a perspective of a Ugandan and someone who comes from a country that's at the mercy of the government. How are we, from your experience, how can we empower, governments to, you spoke a little bit about that, but how can we empower them to sort of take a lead, on issues of cyber and data, and also just from sort of like a perspective of what you spoke about with the roles and having people move between sectors. I really think that this chief data officer role is going to become a role like head of HR. Like, I think this is something that we should have in each organization. But in terms of like government and countries, like ministries and capacity building, what are you seeing? What are the problems? What are the trends? And how can we empower, African governments to do this?
I have a very recent example, and thank you so much for the question. A recent example is that we're based in Geneva. And so we have all the representatives of member states, of UN member states. And we received a kind of like an interesting request, which was like, there was a sort of like more traditional, in a way, training on digital transformation for African countries. And they asked us, can you also bring the cybersecurity in? So one way is really to integrate cybersecurity as a sort of like an integral part of, let's say, as a normalization of the discourse around the digital transformation, SDGs, and so on and so forth. So point number one. Point number two, I think, is finding the right balance between having a very kind of like technical conversation, like, okay, presenting factual data. So how many attacks, how many people impacted, how many money was lost, how much money was lost because of cyber attacks and these kind of things, but also telling the stories. One of the things that we kind of like tried also with government representatives was also to take a different, let's say, path, which was, okay, let me tell you the story of the people that are impacted when a cyber attack hit. And so try also to raise the voice of the people that often cannot access, let's say, directly governments. And the third point, to me, I'm a very big fan of co-design and co-creation. So one of the biggest problems that I've seen, and I worked many, many years for the UN and also for the World Economic Forum, and is that usually civil society organizations are consulted. Fine. No, I'm sorry, they need to sit at the table. Because if you want to find solution, first you need to measure the problem and the solution, which is the role of data, but also you need to understand, which are the needs of the people that you're working with, and they need to sit at the table to design the solutions with you.
So I want to thank both of you and thank you all. I mean, this session in the last 25 minutes, we've covered so many important points. How do we help social impact organizations? How do we help nonprofits really be able to use advanced technologies and data and use them well, keeping in mind the needs of the communities that we're serving, meeting organizations where they are, and both of your organizations are doing such amazing work to support organizations, and doing that, as are, of course, many, many organizations in this room, and bringing together well-informed donors who are really focused on the problem, along with social impact organizations that are trying to address some of those problems at scale, is probably the best chance that we've got to make some real impact in the short term. So lots of opportunity just during the break to follow up with some questions, but thank you all very much for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to transition into a brief break, and by brief we mean about 5 minutes, if we can. Let's see how it goes. So that would put us coming back around 2:55, I think. So grab a coffee, and we'll be back for more. Hi. All right, so we're going to get started again. The rest of our program is just as exciting as the beginning half. Good. So just to give you a preview, if we can keep the doors closed, thank you. Just to give you a preview of the next few bits, we're going to have another Impact in a Moment with Washington University, followed by a fireside chat conversation between Caroline Louveaux, who is the Chief Privacy Officer of Mastercard, and Garrett Graff from Aspen Institute, followed by another Impact in a Minute. And then to finish us off and bring us home for the day, we'll have a fireside chat with Mari Pangestu from the World Bank and Mike Froman, our Vice Chairman of Mastercard. And with that, I would like to invite Dan up for the Impact in a Moment. This is Professor Dr. Dan Ferris from Washington University's Social Policy Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanna. I'm so glad and grateful to be welcoming people back from the break rather than standing in front of people's breaks, to be sure. But over the 5 minutes that we had, I was reflecting on this concept of impact in 60 seconds and what an incredible proxy that is for the challenges and the opportunities that confront the social sector as we think about data. So as innovative data science techniques continue to advance, the social sector has incredible opportunity, challenge around centering community and centering equity in data practice, culture, management, and beyond. Thanks to generous support and leadership from the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, thought partnership from Dataorg and others, thank you so much. At Washington University in St. Louis and the Social Policy Institute, we have developed a new framework and curriculum for data science for social impact for the social sector, grounded again in equitable, community-centered data practice. So participants have been engaging with experts, innovators, practitioners around assess, build, collaborate, cultivate equitable data practice. Alongside an innovative event series going on this year, we are creating a accessible, totally free, online, self-paced curriculum for social sector leaders at all levels and across all roles. Earlier, we were talking about horizontal and vertical. The idea here to be not reinforcing, but to be bringing people back together across silos. So please mark your calendars as we will be bringing people together, including some of the very fine folks here in the room today, on November 15th for a Data Science for Social Impact Summit, both in person in St. Louis as well as virtually. And join us in helping to launch and promote a new, innovative, exciting, accessible curriculum that we hope will have great impact on advancing the field. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. All the way from St. Louis. All right, and I actually mixed up the order earlier when I was announcing it. I got very excited about both of our panels, and so I actually want to invite Mike and Mari up first. Here you go.
Well, it's great to see this room full of so many data science for social impact aficionados and fans, and I'm delighted to welcome Mari Pangestu to our Mastercard Tech Hub. We've known each other for a while. Yes, we were trade ministers together.
Yes.
Mari went on to, of course, become managing director of the World Bank. So the number 2 person there, chief operating officer.
No.
No, I think so. I think so. Person who keeps the whole world together on development, and no better person to talk about the issues that we're going to address today. First question for you. We're going through, it's been a rather amazing period, a health crisis, a climate crisis, a food crisis. As somebody mentioned earlier in the conference today, underlying all of those is data, and the importance of data in being able to monitor the crisis and its evolution, come up with solutions, be more effective in executing those solutions. As head of the World Bank Group, as looking across all the agencies there, how do you think about this from a development perspective, the importance of data, and what's the bank doing to incorporate data into its policy making?
Thanks for that very broad question. But I think just to answer you, even before the crisis, obviously the role of data for development has always been crucial in the bank's mission and in the development work, and in my own experience as a policymaker. If you don't have the data, you really cannot make the right policies, right? And get to the right target. That's always about, okay, how do you design the right policies, reach the right target? Because you have limited resources. I think for developing countries, it's doubly important to have the right policies and know that you're reaching the right target. Because you have limited fiscal resources, so you've got to make sure you want to use it effectively and efficiently. So I think that's always been like the overall framework. But I think the crisis, as you said, really drove home the importance of data for tracing and monitoring the health pandemic, and it highlighted the data gaps that countries had, right? So I just give you a contrast. We were able to scale up the program in India, our social protection program in India, like within a very short period of time working with the government, they could deliver social protection to 800 million people. And we worked with women support groups to reach 200 million women specifically. And that's because they had a digital ID system that was linked to their bank account as well as to their handphones. But then in other countries where you don't have the data, it was sort of like you just in the dark, right? You try to deliver the social protection program without really knowing whether it's reaching who it's reaching. So this is why we discovered that during this with the health crisis, that was really, really key. And we also learn a lot about delivery of social protection, public services, and reaching people on the health side. It had to be broader than just the poor. Yeah. In the past, our social protection programs were really just focused on the very poor. That was the way they was designed, targeted to the very poor. You had, in most countries, not all countries, you had household data of who are the poor. But now, everybody's impacted. The whole economy is impacted. SMEs are impacted. The informal sector are impacted. How do you reach them? So you've got to make it broader. And that's actually where we, countries as well as the bank, we discovered that we have to make it broader. We had to collect different types of data, and we had to work with the private sector. In many countries, we worked with different parts of the private sector. I think Microsoft was also one of the partners. Google, all these partners came together. Google certainly helped with the tracing and the mobility. What was the electricity lights that come on? Who I can't remember. That's Google, I guess. To see where the density of the population, and you find that in very densely poor areas, they can't social distance. Right? You can't enforce policies on social distancing. They're living together in such tight. So this allows you then to say, okay, this is how you have to target better, right? So I think we have learned a lot, and the importance of data, not just data, but digital technology. I think that's the big learning with this crisis, which is now as we try to look ahead in terms of the recovery. What does that mean moving ahead? And how do we build on the data? All kinds of data collection was happening during the pandemic. How do we then build on this to really have more proper data collection? And what did come up as a very key learning was the importance of digital ID. Right? So we are working with, I think, 40 or 50 countries in Africa, for instance, to get their digital ID set up. But then you kind of, in many countries, it's like they don't even have a population registration system. So then you have this big debate. Who gets this data? Does the government go out and collect the data, have a census? Or should it be citizens voluntarily registering? And in the end, we said there's no answer. You kind of maybe have to do both. Yeah, that was the learning from what we were trying to do with many countries. And then you have the question about how do you use the data, right? And who can use the data? What for government service delivery? That's the first use case. But then after that, is it for financial inclusion? Is it for helping targeted groups in a better way? And my final point is that it helps you to monitor whether your policies are reaching where they should be. So we actually did these household and firm level surveys in, I think it was like 50 countries. And I know Indonesia had it. So they could check whether the social protection schemes were actually reaching the people that it was intended to, as well as the firm level support, the SME support was reaching the SME group. The social protection did better than the SMEs. I think maybe only 10% of the SMEs surveyed knew anything about the government program. So obviously, firm level information is much, much harder to get compared to population information.
Let me follow up on a couple of those items. You underscore just how important digital technology is and the tremendous benefits it can have in terms of being able to deliver services more efficiently, have greater impact. But the flip side of that is it underscores just how dangerous it is to have a digital divide between countries that have more connectivity and less connectivity, within countries, between communities, cohorts that may be better connected digitally and those who are not. How do you think about the role of the bank in bridging that digital divide?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think around 2016, the World Bank came out with a really good report, which I actually used a lot when I was back in Indonesia as a policymaker. It frames the issue very much the way you just described it. There are these benefits for the digital economy, for development, right? You have financial inclusion, you can bring in SMEs, people can work from home and deliver to the world, there's all these benefits. But if you don't address the factors that will enable these, to be inclusive, then you will end up with a wider digital divide, as well as risks, right? And why does the digital divide widen? It's because the ones that have access to the connectivity and the ones who are able to use the connectivity for economic value are the better educated ones and the ones who can afford the connectivity. And actually in the pandemic, we also saw that, right? We had in our firm level surveys, it showed that the firms that were able to adjust and make adaptation digitally were the larger firms. The smaller the smaller firms just couldn't do it. And we also had a gender aspect to it, that the women-owned businesses were less able to move to digital, to adapt to a digital response. So we need to do both. That's why when you ask how do we address the digital divide, there are two things that are crucial. One is the physical connectivity. You got to be connected to begin with, and then once you're connected, what do you do with that connectivity? So on the physical connectivity, it is not just about telecommunications infrastructure. 700, I hope I got this number right, 740 million people still don't have electricity. So it's even more basic than that. You've got to have electricity and then the telecommunications infrastructure. Then you need the handset to connect you. So, I remember he's our education minister now, but he was one of these unicorn in Indonesia. We asked him this, he was asked this very question, how do you bridge the digital divide? He said, give everybody a smartphone. And I thought, at that time, that was a very facetious answer, but in retrospect, I think that was one. Yeah, so you have to have that instrument to connect. Maybe it's not it can be the lowest grade of smartphone, but you can still connect, right? And then the other part is the data infrastructure. So you have the physical infrastructure and then the data infrastructure. You have to be able to collect the data that's inclusive so that, everybody's included in that data set. And that's where we think there has to be a lot of investment in data. Whether it's population census, whether it's, 2/3 of countries in Africa didn't do their population census because they ran out of resources during COVID. Half of Latin America also didn't do their population census. So, getting the data, investing in data, whether it's government surveys, but we can't just rely on government. We should involve partnerships with the private sector as well as with citizens. Citizens can also contribute to the data. And then once you have the data, how do you share it? How do you exchange it in a trusted way? How do you have a secured digital ID system that the citizens feel is being used for their benefit and not being abused, right? So these are, I think, the issues that we have identified. We are working with countries to try to help build these policies as well as physical infrastructure.
Just to build on that, the point you made about trust, it does seem like in a digital economy, trust is the major currency. Your willingness to share your information, have your information used, who's going to control it. It's something we wrestle with here every day to make sure we're living by our own data principles. How do you think about the various parties in the ecosystem, governments, international organizations, the private sector, NGOs, and the individuals? Who can be trusted with information? Or how do we ensure that all the parties in the ecosystem that need to play a role with regard to data are respecting the principles necessary to establish and maintain that trust?
That's a really good question. I think we're still searching for the right balance of technical as well as legal regulations and standards, as well as how to enable a productive, collaborative partnership in sharing the data. And that's kind of the big framing. But I would start with the government to begin with, because a lot of data is with the government. And this is one of the, we had a WDR report last year called Data for Better Lives, which actually goes into a lot of this discussion. But one of the important points that was made in that report was the importance of the data in the government context. It has to be centralized. Centralized is not a good word really, but maybe coordinated in one central place, which is at a very high level politically, right, underneath the president or something at that level. It shouldn't be in the Bureau of Statistics, where it tends to be. Most countries will put their data in the Bureau of Statistics. And as we all know, governments within government, they don't share their data either, right? That's why you need to pull it up to that level. And then there is also the issue of sharing data within government, that they have to come up with the protocol, right? And in some countries, I think that's the data portal that you need to have, including the digital ID. And then the government needs to come up with regulations, standards, and a trusted way where that data can be shared. And what I've heard two different extremes on how this is done. In Estonia, they actually worked with the commercial banks to come up with a way that you can share this data in a trusted way, which benefited the consumers, but benefited also the private sector. But in Peru, it was very much government, and then they created an independent, like, what would you call it, an independent agency that would rule, was this abused or not? You had a final appeal, kind of. The government will come up with the sharing, but then if somebody protests and say, "Oh, you didn't do this in the right way," whether it's an institution or an individual, there's a process that independent process that oversees and rules as to whether this was abused or not, right? So that's another way to do it. But I think the issues around, I'm sure you had a session this morning on privacy, right? The rules around privacy, and do you go the European way or do you go in another direction? I think these are still questions to be asked. How do you deal with cybersecurity? How do you deal with other security risks? And how do you deal with, in a non-democratic country, how do you deal with the data being misused, in a way that is for political motivation, et cetera, et cetera. These are, I think, hard questions that I hope with all the partners together we can really come up with some answers. But I just wanted, I have to mention this one, which is the development data partnership with the private sector, right? Because I just wanted to mention this because I think it's very relevant for Mastercard and the audience here. I think since 2019, the consortium of international organizations, World Bank, IMF, OECD, and UNDP, we've been building a data governance system for secure and responsible use of third-party data to inform policy. And we are actually, we have signed 30 data license agreements with private companies like Meta, LinkedIn, Mapbox, and Twitter to support 300 projects. So the idea is how do we have a workable relationship to share data and governance that will benefit for development, but also it doesn't violate any of your NDAs and so on. So I think this is, because I think private sector data, big data, is going to be really important in supplementing the collection of data by governments.
Well, I want to ask a lot. We're out of time, I see. I'm getting the hook from the back, but let me make one more point and ask you to respond. One of the things we've worked with the World Bank on over several years has been the Findex and the tracking of financial inclusion around the world, and the World Bank plays an absolutely central role in understanding financial inclusion and in measuring progress towards it. We are wrestling with and looking at not just how to measure access to financial services, but how to make sure that that access is producing financial security, financial health. And that's a much more complicated data exercise. There aren't great single databases that look across countries like that. How do you think about that? I know the World Bank is similarly focused on not just how many people can access the system, but what impact is it having on their lives?
Absolutely. I think we're working hard to improve that Findex data set, to not just be calculating our percentage of population that have bank accounts, but how do they use those bank accounts? You know, is it for savings? Is it for investment? And the whole issue about financial literacy. And we also have a gender disaggregation on this data, so and also size of firm and so on. So you can really get granular in terms of, you know, what are the obstacles for financial, using the financial inclusion that will actually make that person or that company develop and use it for bettering their lives, right? So I think that is part of the way we need to target better as to understanding what are the policies that work to help empower women, persons, or small and medium-sized enterprises to actually utilize their digital connectivity and financial inclusion to better their lives, as well as to make that leapfrog to enter the digital economy, right? And that will reduce. That's the only way you can reduce the digital divide. Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking Mari Pangestu for taking time out, being here, joining us.
All right, just a quick round of applause for them. Thank you. Fantastic. All right, so we're coming to the last little bits of this juicy program. So I'd like to invite Dr. Sutherland up for an Impact in a Minute from Howard University. Thank you.
So first, I want to say that I am a college professor, and giving a college professor a 1-minute assignment is very ambitious. So I thank you for that confidence in me. So we are very excited at Howard. Thank you to Mastercard. In the last year, we have launched our new Center for Applied Data Science and Analytics. And I want to just describe the center for you, but as well I'll give you some of the features that we've been working on. The center is really based on 4 general topics, and that is, one is the area of minority health and health disparities, and social justice, economic development, and environmental justice as well. So everything we do is centered around those. And 2 of the initiatives of the center is that we are engaged in bringing new talent to Howard, and by that, what we're doing is we're recruiting, right now in the process of recruiting 6 data science of faculty, tenure-track faculty to come to Howard to work in these various areas. And in addition to that, we are in the process of launching our new master's program in applied data science. And some of the features of that program is that it is available to, intentionally making it available to STEM and non-STEM scientists, students as well. And another aspect of the program is that all students in the program will take some training in social justice. So it's a 3-semester program, and including 1 semester that is capstone, hands-on capstone. And so the overall philosophy of this program is that to create a cadre of data science professionals that can go out in society then and become agents of data equity. And we believe something that Danielle said earlier, it makes a difference who the data scientists are. That resonates so well with our thinking at Howard University. It's just because a data scientist that looks like me is going to have a different background, a different set of experiences, and that background and experiences is going to just contribute a different way of looking at the question, looking at the problem. We're going to ask things differently because we have a different background, we have a different experiences, we have a different life story DNA, I guess I can say. And that life story DNA is going to project a certain thing. And that certain thing has been missing. And we aim to fill it. Okay, my time is up. Okay. I mean, that's why we built in social scientist training for everybody that comes into the program. We think it's very important. So I just want to say that. I told you I was a college professor, right? 1 minute can be it. But what you need? I'm up, right? My time is up, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So that's about basically what I really had to say, and just that we're very excited and we're appreciative to Mastercard and what they're doing and how they're helping us. We're just getting started, So we have the new kid on the block excitement. So we're getting going with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sutherland. We're hoping that this is the future of data science everywhere and data science education. And with that, I'd like to invite Garrett and Caroline up for the last fireside panel of the day. Fireside chat, I suppose.
Hello.
Hello.
It's great to have the chance to chat with you a little bit about your role and the way that you approach these issues at Mastercard. I thought I would sort of start off by asking you about the philosophy that you bring to being Chief Privacy Officer, which sort of sounds like it is a role uniquely positioned to both be the butt of all of the complaints from outside the company, but also the butt of many of the complaints from inside the company at the same time.
Thanks, Garrett, for that interesting question. Look, I'm going to answer your question, but first I would like to, I'm a lawyer, so I'd like to question the title of the chat. How do we balance data impact with data privacy? Really, to me, both go really hand in hand, right? Like twins. And I have a positive bias for twins because I have some at home. So I think in this room, everybody agrees that data can be leveraged and has the potential to be leveraged for social impact, from the pandemic to climate change, etc. But we're only going to see that positive impact if the data that is powering these innovations is being handled responsibly with full respect of people's privacy. So I would like to reframe the title of the conversation. How do we achieve both data impact and data privacy? And so at Mastercard, actually, our North Star is our data responsibility principles. And I've heard this morning, I've heard this afternoon about data values. Well, that's exactly this. It starts with 4 promises that we make to individuals. When it comes to your data, Garrett, you own it, you control it, you should benefit from its use, and we protect it. And so these principles guide all our data activities at Mastercard, including our Data for Good initiatives. at the end of the day. And so how do we, I think the complexity is that how do you bring these principles to life? And we do that through a privacy by design approach, where we really embed privacy controls into the design of everything that we do. And that requires, and that actually makes me think of the co-creation. You know, this is exactly what it is. So privacy, security, technology, product people, we all sit together and we explore important questions like, can we collect less data and still achieve the same objective? Can we encrypt, tokenize, anonymize the data? Can we provide people with more transparency, more control over their data? When we use new technologies like AI, can we review them to make sure that it doesn't create unintended consequences like bias, discrimination, et cetera, So the whole purpose is really to put the individual at the very center of all we do. So it doesn't have to be in the way.
So, and what do you hear from consumers about what matters to them in terms of their data privacy? I mean, we heard this conversation earlier today about trying to shift from data consent to data confidence. And I'm wondering sort of what you hear when you're talking to consumers about what actually matters to them in privacy.
That's also a good question. First of all, let me tell you that I'm not talking to consumers all day long. That's not my job. But yes, I hear from them. A couple of different things. First of all, people care about privacy. You know, their expectations have changed. They demand actually to understand what's going on with their data. So at Mastercard, and I think at many other companies, we receive increasing requests from our cardholders, and they want to understand what data Mastercard holds about them. And so we have actually, established a website where you can, make a request, you get access to all your data, etc. But it's often a misunderstanding about the data ecosystem. You know, where data sits. I think consumers are confused, and I think who is not really. So I think, and then actually going back to the data confidence and data consent piece. I'm not a strong fan of the consent model, not because I don't like consent, but because I think that consent has been used and abused. It's being asked for anything, and people are totally overwhelmed by the choices that they are being asked to make. So I think we should actually keep consent to some very sensitive scenarios, so that to make sure that people pay attention. Because who here reads all the privacy notices, all the cookie banners? Nobody. So I think the solution is more like, the focus should be on transparency and accountability. And we've heard it before, right? And transparency, let's be open about and transparent about what data, why are we using the data, and who is going to process my data and access my data. These are my 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And accountability, yeah, of course, actually. Look, the onus and the burden cannot be just on the consumer. It has to be on companies and governments that touch the data, right? And one thing that that I'm a strong believer in, I think we should go also explore certifications and trust mark, like the organic trust mark in the food industry. You know, that could act as a strong trust driver. Companies could be incentivized to go the extra mile to get that certification, because that could be a strong competitive differentiator for them. And then it would make it so much easier for people to understand who to trust with their data, right? So I think that would help everybody actually to know who to trust.
Mm-hmm. Sort of throughout the day today, we've been talking about really 2 different frameworks for thinking about privacy. One is values and one is regulation. Those are not always in alignment, particularly on the global scale that you operate at and that Mastercard operates at. And I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about how you balance the different regulatory regimes that you operate in while making sure that the values remain the same at the foundational level.
Great. Yes, absolutely. Look, first of all, let me tell you that, so what we do, when we do a privacy by design approach, we take the GDPR basically as our main global standard, and then we adjust depending on the countries to make sure that we address the local specificities. This being said, today we face a patchwork of laws and regulations that impact how data can be collected, used, and shared. And even worse, that tsunami of regulations introduced restrictions on cross-border data flows. But to be honest, this is not sustainable. Data has no frontiers. So if we want to leverage data for social impact, data has to be collected and shared from across the globe, right? So I think it's really time to reopen the dialogue to develop these common standards, common principles on privacy, data, and technology. And there are already a couple of interesting initiatives ongoing within the context of the OECD, G7, G20, but I think it's time to make it a priority.
So, and one of the things that we've, I think, sort of heard sort of trickle through some of the conversations today is, one of the big changes in the last 10 years of the internet is that the dream of sort of a single global unified internet has died, and that we're sort of splintering more into, 3 very different internets. One sort of based around authoritarian countries, one that's sort of more GDPR driven in Europe, one in the US that's sort of more the like free-for-all that the US is ending up with. And I'm wondering...
You're not very optimistic.
Yes. And I'm wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit more about how you navigate, you talk about GDPR as sort of the standard, but at the other end of that spectrum, there are an increasing number of countries that are trying to use a much sort of more aggressive surveillance state against their citizens, that presumably some of the data that you have, can now or in the future be used against those citizens. And I'm sort of wondering how you navigate those and the way that you think about the global landscape where you're doing business.
This is a very politically charged question, Garrett. Well, that's an issue, of course. It's a concern, and I think it's a concern for everyone. I think everybody's concerned. I'm part of an expert group within the context of OECD just for that, to make sure that all countries which are members of OECD agree on common principles, so that actually private sector companies like ours cannot be asked to give away data that would actually put people's privacy at risk. So we still, again, what I said remains true. We do protect the data of all the cardholders in very similar way with strict standards. And we have, the good news is that we are not being asked yet by a lot of governments to give away our data, because at the end of the day, Mastercard has, we don't have the name of people, we don't have their phone number, etc. So usually governments are looking for more information than that. But to be honest, I think that's a very valid concern, and I don't have the perfect answer for that one.
Moving towards sort of the more hopeful end of the question spectrum now. Talk to me sort of a little bit about how you, and this was in some ways where we started the conversation, when you think about how you can leverage data for social impact, sort of where are you seeing that being done successfully in your portfolio, and sort of what is your recipe for success?
Let me think about that for a second. Look, I don't want to repeat myself. So my recipe for success is, again, our privacy by design approach, data responsibility, principles and values. But what I wanted to say maybe is 2 things. I think we may want to have more investments in, for example, technologies. There's a lot of potential in what we call privacy-enhancing technologies, which are technologies that enable data to be shared, to be analyzed, so that you can extract the value from all that data, but in a way that is fully privacy-preserving. And they have really weirdo names, like homomorphic encryption, multi-party computation, you name it. There is huge potential there, and I think this is really an area that we may want to invest further. And second, it's partnerships. No one can do this alone, right? We need to have a dialogue involving multiple stakeholders from different jurisdictions, governments, civil society, industry, academics, and again, involving a diversity of perspectives and diversity of disciplines. Law, technology, but also economists, ethicists, anthropologists. I'm gonna stop there. So it has really to be a collective effort. So that's what I would.
And where do you think you see the sector having room for improvement? Like, where would you like efforts to be making more progress?
I think we need also more experimentation. So to be honest, I think it's bringing actually all these different stakeholders together. And one thing that I'm a fan of, and I think we should we should see more of that, is what I call the regulatory sandboxes. These are sandboxes that enable companies to test their ideas, their innovations, their technologies in a safe and controlled environment with the regulators and receiving guidance from regulators. I think that could bring actually everybody together, bring also regulators and policymakers up to speed on the latest technologies. I know that we don't talk about data literacy anymore, but I can't remember the term, but that's it, right? Because again, I think that lots of good intentions right now, but working in silos, and I think that cannot work.
Great. Thanks so much. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett, Carolyn. I'm Arturo Franco. I'm a Senior Vice President here at the Center for Inclusive Growth, and I have that distinct honor to close not just this amazing, inspiring, insightful conversation of this afternoon, but perhaps for a lot of you, a very intense week of ONGA and Climate Week and the Clinton Global Initiative and many New York activities that leave me to echo Dan and Kate really with a sense of hope. 3.5 years ago, the Center for Inclusive Growth started our impact data science pillar. We didn't have any grants. Mastercard was doing a lot of really good work on data for good, but the center was not doing anything. And today you've seen many of our partners, many of our grantees, and that gives me a lot of hope. That's what we've achieved together in only 3.5 years. And it's great to see, everyone doing so well, everyone having such an impact. The other feeling that I have coming out of ONGA, it's not as nice as hope, is urgency. We need to act faster, and we need to move faster, and we need to do things now. And so I am going to invite you to stick around for just a little more. I know everyone's super tired this week, but we're going to talk about funding, and we're going to talk about what else can we do to have more impact in the data space. And so please stick around. There'll be more coffee and more cookies. And thank you so much for coming here, engaging in this conversation, super important conversation, showing the impact that you're having. Can't wait to see what we do in the next 3.5 years. Thank you.